I'm Matt Guichard, and this is No Holds Barred. In this episode, we're going to talk about pedestrian right-of-way, that issue related to crosswalks. Another question that often comes up is, why do I have to stop for somebody who's walking so slowly in a crosswalk, and I'm in a hurry? Well, the fact of the matter is, under California Vehicle Code Section 21950, the right-of-way at crosswalks belongs to that pedestrian. So if the pedestrian is lawfully in that crosswalk, you have to yield to them. You have to let them finish their walk, even though you think you could quickly sneak by, no harm, no foul. The bigger question comes up when we're talking about a divided highway or divided road. So you think of a city like Walnut Creek, California, and California Boulevard. It's 2 lanes in each direction, a divider down the middle. And what happens when somebody steps off the curb on the other side of that divided road and is walking towards you lawfully in the crosswalk, and you have 2 full lanes, nobody in them, and you have the right-of-way? And that's a good question. Theoretically, you can make that turn because the person has not reached the median point. Because think if the light turned red, they would have an obligation to stop at that median point, stand on that median until the next cycle of that crosswalk light. But in all other cases, please stop for them, no matter if you're in a hurry, and let them finish getting across the street before entering that crosswalk. You often see sting operations where the police will go out to an area in which people continually blast through crosswalks. So in our building over in Concord, there was a very, very busy intersection on Clayton Road with a crosswalk and no light. And people would be right in the middle of it, and cars would be flying through there at 45 miles an hour. The Concord police regularly would do a sting operation in which they had a number of motor officers down the road, and they had an officer in plainclothes walking back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And every time somebody blew through there, they would be stopped and ticketed. And let me tell you, I'd look out my office, and every time I saw that, I would see multiple tickets being written. And no one was getting, we'll give you a pass on this one, just don't do it again. Every single person who did that, who violated that pedestrian right-of-way, got a ticket. And that's not something that you want. Now let's say you are driving down the road and the light is green for you in a direction, and there in the crosswalk, walking against the red, is a pedestrian. Do you have a duty to yield to that pedestrian? Well, that's just common sense. If the person is in the crosswalk and crossing against the red, you got one of 2 choices, I suppose. You could run them over, or you could stop and wait for them to go across. And that's the smarter thing. Safety is paramount. That's what you need to do. You need to watch out for pedestrians, even when they are breaking the law. There is an interesting vehicle code section in the state of California, and that is, it involves jaywalking. And jaywalking is walking across on a street between 2 controlled intersections. So if there's a block in which on one end there's a traffic light and on the other end a stop sign, that block has 2 controlled intersections, and anyone walking mid-block is jaywalking, and they're violating the law, and they can get a ticket for that. We found not very long ago a number of elderly people were being ticketed for jaywalking in the city of Walnut Creek. And why was that? Because there was a high number of people were being injured by motor vehicles when they were jaywalking. So the police determined that they were going to start enforcing that more and more. And what people would say, well, wait a minute, I've done this forever, and cops have even watched me, and Nobody's ever given me a ticket. Well, yeah, I suppose you were lucky, because the fact of the matter is you cannot jaywalk, or you will be cited for jaywalking between two controlled intersections. What if one is not a controlled intersection? What if it's a full city block, but there's no control down at the other end? There is no stop sign and no light. Then it's not jaywalking. You are not jaywalking, walking in the middle of that block when one end of the block is not controlled. However, the moral of the story is be safe. If you're a pedestrian, don't jaywalk. And if you're a pedestrian and there's one intersection that's controlled and one not, go down to that controlled intersection and safely cross. Why put your life in peril? As to the motor vehicle, be careful when you see somebody out on the roadway. Yield to them even if they're violating the law. But more importantly, and back to our discussion initially, if they are in a crosswalk lawfully, you have an absolute duty to yield to that pedestrian, and you will get a ticket if an officer sees you failing to yield to that pedestrian. All right, let's talk about that issue of intersections, injuries, and we get back to the whole idea of what if you fail to yield and you injure that person? They're walking a little faster than you thought and you run into them. You will be liable. You will be cited. And if, unfortunately, you happen to kill that person in that crosswalk for failing to yield, if it's just ordinary negligence, you just stupidly thought you could do it, it can be a misdemeanor manslaughter. If you do it with gross negligence, it can be a felony vehicular manslaughter. So those are the bad things that can happen. No reason why you want to have any of those bad things happen, and no reason why you even want to get a ticket for failing to yield to a pedestrian in a crosswalk. Now, there's one additional clarification I'd like to make. More recently, we've seen crosswalks that are lighted, and I lighted lights go off flashing to caution you. And remember when I talked before about, let's say, a divided road, California Boulevard in Walnut Creek with 2 lanes in each direction. Somebody's in that crosswalk, but on the other side, they're nowhere near you and you can safely pass. And most people do that, and rarely would you ever get a ticket for that. However, in the crosswalk that has those flashing lights, you have an obligation to stop. So when you see those flashing lights, you don't get to look and say, oh, I see the guy on the other side, I'm going to go flying through because I think I can make it. That's an obligation to be safe and to slow down and to stop. So you need to do that. And once that person is safely across, you can proceed. And you can proceed even when the lights are still flashing, if in fact that pedestrian has safely passed in front of you and perhaps gotten to the median strip or is moving along or has even reached the other side. You can still go when it's flashing as long as there's no one else in that crosswalk who's also crossing. So that's an important clarification. When you see that, slow down and stop and allow that pedestrian to cross the street. That concludes this episode of No Holds Barred. Like and subscribe, and stay tuned for our next episode.